Mike Murphy,
Here.
Austin Sade.
Present.
Oh, I was going to say we lost him. Aaron is absent. Kevin Scully,
Present.
Peter Lewis.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to start the meeting with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So before we get started, I just want to, clarify for everybody, this is a ZBA workshop session. We don't often hold these because we can usually take care of the business that's before the board with our regular monthly meeting. So this meeting is really for the benefit of the board to catch up on the many submittals we've received, mainly on the Verizon application, but later on we can talk maybe a little bit about some of the other applications that we have before us because we are getting quite busy. We may even look to do these workshop sessions more frequently in the future. The point behind the meeting is it's here for the benefit of the board members. Okay, it has to be held in public, so we are on this Zoom meeting, but this is not a forum for back and forth dialogue with the public. The public is welcome to listen in and hear what we have to say and see who we're talking to and what's going on. But this is really not going to be a back and forth between all of the public and the applicants and ourselves. All right, so I just want that to be understood up front. We will ask people to speak on an as-needed basis. And what I have in mind for tonight is we've received 3 major submittals again since the last meeting 2 weeks ago. One was an updated report from our telecommunications specialist, Cityscape, represented by Rick Edwards and Anthony Lepore. The other is a submittal from Verizon, where they just kind of updated their prior submittals, tried to answer some of the questions that were raised during the previous meeting in June. And then there was also another submittal made by the attorney for Meadow Glen. And if they're with us tonight, I'll ask them, eventually to just kind of give us a briefing on, what their submittal consists of this week. Again, there's lots of papers that are crossing our desks under this application. Much of it reads, like legal terminology. We're used to seeing plans and, drawings of that nature rather than seeing so much text. So there's a lot of mail to follow during this process. With that being said, I would, before we get to, brief presentations from each of our consultants here and the applicant, I'd like to kind of open it up to the board to see if you guys have any particular questions you're looking at to go over tonight.
Mr. Chairman, right before you do that, I just want to reiterate, I'm pretty sure what you said was crystal clear, but just to the record there's no question. This is not the public hearing. This is not
Correct.
A continuation of the public hearing. Nothing said in this meeting will be part of the public hearing record. The public hearing was continued to the next meeting date. I don't have it in front of me, but everyone knows when it is. I think it's the 28th.
Yes, it's the 28th.
Yeah, so the 28th. So I just wanted to be crystal clear on that. And you explained what the purpose of the meeting was, is tonight. And that's all.
Okay, thank you, David. So I'll go down the list. Peter, do you have any questions you want to get out on the floor tonight for the board?
Yeah, I think there's, obviously this has been an application before us for a while now. I think we're doing our due diligence and we're doing a solid investigation regarding it. Obviously, there's a lot of things to consider and I've thought through a lot of these things. And, one of the things that I find interesting is that, I don't believe any of us on the board are lawyers, so we can read laws, we can read things, and we obviously have David to interpret for us. But one of the things, it seems that Mr. Olson and Mr. Campanelli are obviously very well versed in this, on the legal aspect of all of this. And there's a lot of discrepancies in the submittals, contradicting each other, saying, this is the proper, for instance, one says that we're not applying the applicable variance standard, or there's definitions between least intrusive and minimal intrusion. And then, somebody says that the homeowners aren't persons adversely affected. So I think one of the things, and I'm not looking for answers tonight, I think David needs to think through this, but one of the things I'm interested in understanding is I'd like to see a synopsis from a legal point of view, at least from our counsel, to say, okay, this is what this person says, this is what that person says, this is what's right, or this, I mean, some of it's open for interpretation, I'm sure. But in terms of considering a lot of these legal aspects of it, we've heard a lot of different opinions. And, I'm not clear yet if what Mr. Olson says is correct or what Mr. Campanelli says is correct. I just look at both of their sides and they make valid arguments. So I'm thinking one of the things, that I'm looking for is some of that definition of what is the right, law to look at, or what is the right interpretation to look at. The other things I'm interested in from the cityscape's point of view is, we talk about things like alternative sites and search rings. And, that's something I think that maybe Rick can talk to us about, but I have some thoughts on that as we kind of get to that in the meeting. One of my big concerns, it's been all along, has been this eligible facility law that Rick mentions. That's a big concern of mine. And it's something I think that we need to kind of look at. I know in his latest submittal, he mentions alternatives and other things that we can consider in this process. So I'm interested in hearing as to what he says about that. And, I think through that, there'll be a lot of other questions that could come up as we listen and talk to some of the other people. So those are the things that I'm trying to, get my head around, with today's meeting.
Well, Peter, I thank you for, being so clear about it. I mean, I feel the same way. We're looking at a bunch of documents that look more like legal briefs than the plans that we typically look at the ZBA, just determining whether or not there's a rear yard variance that's required. This is a lot more complicated than that, a lot of legal issues to it. So, thanks for, giving us your thoughts on that. I happen to agree with you. We really do need for Dave, who has been, wonderful in guiding us through this process, to go through all these documents we've been receiving and help us filter it out to, where do we really stand on all of this due to the conflicting opinions we seem to be receiving. Kevin, do you have any questions you'd like to get off your chest before we get started?
Peter pretty much summed everything up. That was my concern.
Okay, thank you. And Austin? Austin, are you out there, buddy?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, great. Okay. So, yeah, I think it's been summed up pretty well. The only thing I wanted to mention was that I worry about our involvement from a design aspect, and I want to make sure that as we're proceeding forward with the limited amount of time that we have to reach a consensus on this application, that we are not kind of encroaching on the responsibility of, I would imagine, either the homeowners association acting as a I guess as a valve for the homeowners, or by the attorney that they've hired, or by another body that represents the homeowners, in order to kind of broker a deal between Verizon and the homeowners as to what is aesthetically approved or acceptable. I think that it's our responsibility as as an agency or a department of the town, and as the authority, I guess, having jurisdiction over the the outcome of the application, that we're responsible and diligent with kind of making sure that there's a mechanism for the application to be approved if it makes sense, and if it's somewhat agreed upon, across the board. But I think in terms of the way the tower looks, the way the way it's sited. I think that we have to be careful that we're not kind of overstepping our boundaries as a board. So I just want to make sure that we're giving responsible for the decision making in terms of how the tower may look, their opportunity to make that decision without us getting too involved with that.
Okay, thanks, Austin. I differ a
That makes
little bit
sense.
with you on that opinion. I think if we do find our way to an approval for the variance on this, that we have to send this, because their next step is to go to the planning board. But I would like to send this to the planning board with some recommendations, based on the findings that come out of this process. Because if we just send it to the planning board and say, here, we granted the variances, you guys figure out the site plan. I want to make sure that, with all the time and effort we've invested in this review process, that, some of our thoughts get implemented in the ultimate plan that goes to the planning board, should they get the variances.
I agree with you. I guess what I'm just saying is that I don't know how much we are going to be involved in the actual, the aesthetics of the tower. So it's certainly our responsibility to do all the things you just said, but ultimately the people who have to live with this every day are the people that live in this area. So
right.
They'd be the ones to kind of make the decision as to what looks the best for them. If if it's decided that everything is kind of feasible and legally okay,
Right.
Well, not to interrupt, but I think the aesthetics are a huge part of what we need to consider. I mean, I'm not saying, I agree with you, Austin, in terms of us being the ones brokering what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. I don't know, that's a question for the legal for Dave or for, the board to decide if, how much input is involved. Obviously we're not in a public meeting. Next week or when the next meeting is, we will be in a public meeting. We will hear, obviously we know we're going to hear from the residents as to, what they think about, the aspects of it. And if there's an acceptable aesthetic compromise or something like that, we're going to hear people's opinions. And, I'm interested in that, interested in what people have to say and what they think about that.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't heard a lot about aesthetics, so to speak. We've heard a lot about placement.
Yeah, but in Rick's submittal today, he kind of makes a
did,
proposal. I don't know if that's going to
color.
be something acceptable for people, but
I could kind of jump in on that. What appears to be maybe an area of confusion, because in this, but the law in this area is complex, and as I read the briefs submitted by Mr. Campanelli and Mr. Olson, there's a lot of advocacy and rhetoric that you often see in legal briefs. I honestly don't think that they disagree too much on, the substantive legal standards. I think that there's different ways you can slice it. But to your point about should the board be involved in aesthetics, et cetera, it's not so much aesthetics per se as it is, visual impacts. Ordinarily this board is not dealing with that in granting area variances, setback variances. It's just geometry and it's, impact to the neighborhood. So in some ways it does touch on aesthetics in terms of, how does it look to the neighbor? What's the impact on the community? And I guess that would be the analogy I would make. It's, you're part of what you're charged to do in this use variance is not in any way, shape, or form related to what the typical confined area of use variance is under town law. You're all familiar with that standard and how high a bar it is. And from the beginning, I've told you that that standard is not the one that applies. It's the one that it's the utility-based use variance standard. But it's not that simple either, because it's not just the New York State use variance standard under the Rosenberg case. It's also a body of federal law that talks about the Federal Telecommunications Act, and there's a lot of interplay between the state and federal law and the different standards. But one of the standards that is roughly applicable under both is whether this is a minimally intrusive or the least intrusive alternative that solves the problem. I'm skipping past the first two important ones, which are, which has the applicant identified the need, and will this proposal satisfy the need? I'm just going to assume for the sake of this discussion that you're past those two. I don't know if you are or not, but if you are, the issue is the third one under both state and federal law. The issues kind of come together as to you can't just satisfy the need and say there's a need, satisfy the need, and put up, the most obtrusive tower known to man when there are other either A, alternative locations, or B, alternative, designs that would have less of a visual impact. And the visual impact goes to not only the location, but also the way it's designed on a site. And so the state and federal law, allow you to look at that visual impact. So that's where the aesthetics that you're talking about, come in. So Austin, I appreciate that. Like, you don't want to get into designing this thing from the ground up, for the reasons you stated, and also for the reasons that's usually, an area that is addressed by the planning board, right? You're used to sending things back to the planning board and they figure out, well, exactly what's it going to look like if you have a commercial application. Is there going to be screening? Is there going to be this? What's the, is there a SWIP required? Is there, all the different planning board minutia that they get into that the zoning board typically doesn't. Here, I do think you need to get into it. I think it's proper under the law, and I think it is important to not only look at the alternative. Are there alternative locations? Are there other less intrusive means to satisfy the need other than citing it on this particular parcel? And, if not, are there other less intrusive means, or is this minimally intrusive? The design that's suggested by Verizon, that's proposed by Verizon, is it minimally intrusive? And or is it the least intrusive means to solve the problem that they've identified? And I'm sort of intentionally bringing those two standards, the minimal intrusiveness and is it the least intrusive means, because that's a kind of a complex legal issue, but they're speaking to the same general issue. If they're proposing something that is where there's an alternative that has a less of an impact, well, they're required to go with the lesser impact. You're required to approve only the one with the lesser impact. You're not allowed to grant the one that's got the massive impact or that's not minimal, right? So I don't know if that helps frame it, but that's my understanding of the broad outline of the law to help you look at the issues you need to look at.
I think it makes sense, David. I think one of the things that I was considering was in a forum like a public hearing, right? If we're a group of say 5, right? So if we were to consider what's the least intrusive, what's the most intrusive, we could certainly think about that and speak out loud about that. But I'm not the one that has to walk out my front door and look at this thing every day. So if there's an entire group of residents on the other end of the line that in this today's day and age, we're all on a Zoom meeting, are we looking to the folks that live in this area to put their hands up if we think that option 1 is the most intrusive, option 3 is the most? Again, also another thing is is it the residents that we're concerned about? Is it who is the body that represents this development? Is it the homeowners association? Is it the attorney? Who is ultimately responsible for the decision making when it comes to opining on which is the most or least intrusive?
Well,
or is it all of the above?
Well,
or is it just us?
Well, the reality is, it's you. You're the deciding board. You have to decide whether what the applicant has proposed is, presents a minimal intrusion, or is it the least intrusive alternative. It's up to you to decide. And now you use your collective judgment and knowledge of local conditions and hear from those who are impacted, i.e., all residents of the town, because that's, you're looking after all residents of the town, not simply those in the immediate neighborhood, but those in the immediate neighborhood are certainly most significantly impacted. So that's why you're hearing from them. You want to hear what they have to say about the visual impact and the other and otherwise. But ultimately, you're not a board that is acting as a mediator. You can't defer the decision to, Mr. Campanelli or the president of the homeowners association or to one or more members of the public. As much as you'd like to get everybody in the room, bang heads and say, look, guys, if it has to be here, this is what it should look like. You can't, they're not going to do that. You have to do that. That's your job, unfortunately, but that's your charge. Or to say, look, it doesn't meet the standard. It is not, what they proposed is not the least intrusive, or it's not a minimal intrusion, or they haven't established to you the need, or that this satisfies the need, that there are other alternatives, other locations that are feasible that provide less of an intrusion onto the, the zoning scheme, or less of an impact on the community. Like, those are decisions that you have to make. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. No, it does answer the question. And I guess the last thing I'll bring up before I stop talking here is that we have a shot clock, and that, I'm just concerned. I want to make sure that, because I haven't heard anything back from, Verizon, at least on our end. And I just want to make sure that within the time that we have here, do they intend on bringing any alternatives, to the table? Because, that's a big question, right? But we do evaluate a visual impact of this, this application. We're going to need to see something, I would assume before the next meeting, right? So,
yeah, that's a great point. And I would hope and expect that, that the Verizon representatives would see and understand that this board is really rolling up its sleeves and it's not being dilatory, and it's looking at legitimate issues, and it's got a lot of complex issues, and it's trying to tackle them. And that if we need more time, another month to make a decision, I would hope and expect that the applicant would accommodate that, particularly since we might be asking them for more information, and you can't make a decision without or until you get that information. I would think that we would not have a problem in that regard.
Thank you, David.
Mhm.
All right, so, at the beginning of the meeting, I said, what I wanted to hear is just a briefing from each of the three major submittals that we received in the last 2 weeks since the prior meeting, just to give us an idea of what's in your documents. So as we sit down and read through them, we can appreciate what's already in there, and we know what to look for. Given that, I think what I'd like to do is go through the list and allow Verizon the stage first, to give them the opportunity to say, okay, this is what we submitted to you this month. And follow that with the Meadow Glen attorney. If there's anybody representing them on the line right now, I don't see Mr. Campanelli.
He's there. I see him
there.
Oh, is
I'm
he?
here.
Okay. Okay, so then I'll ask him to do his presentation, and then finally, I think I'd like to hear from Cityscape, our telecommunications consultant at the end of the list. So if everybody's on board with that, I'd like to open it up to Verizon, just to, not to go in and debate every little fact, but just kind of give us an overview of what's in the latest submittal that you submitted. And the one question that I do have that Austin was asking is, where's the alternatives analysis? I've asked this 4 times now, and what maybe we think differently in terms of what an alternatives analysis consists of. I believe I sent you an email that said, look, this is what I'm looking for. I want to know the X number of sites you looked at, where they're located, how big the tower is in those locations, and what are your zoning hurdles in those locations, just so that we have an overall sense of it. I mean, we are not RF experts here on this board, so we have to take your word on that data that you present to us, or allow Cityscape to review your data and give us their concurrence or cite what might be wrong with that data. But what I'm really looking for is, here's the 4 or 5 sites we've looked at. I don't think we've heard that yet. And I haven't seen a drawing of that. And that's what I've been asking for a couple of months now. And that I find, disturbing that either you don't understand what I'm asking for or you don't have what I'm asking for. So, not to put you on the spot, Scott, but, if you'd like to address that and what it is that you did submit to us this past week so that we can have an understanding of what we need to review between now and 2 weeks from now.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Murphy, and I appreciate this workshop meeting being set up. I think we have a couple of issues that I think we have to talk about. You obviously want to hear some additional information, and we are glad to provide that. So I'm glad that everybody was able to attend and that you have a quorum. I'll go into your question right off the bat. We have submitted alternatives analyses. We have a site selection analysis. We have RF data and RF supplement. They're in there. Now, I've spoken to Mr. McCartney recently. I think it was yesterday. We're willing to kind of simplify it, to provide a list, to make it easier, because, Mike Crosby's RF information is very technical, but it does have that information there.
Right, and that's the point, is that technical RF information, we're not as interested in that. If you could give us a one-pager on each one of the sites that you've looked at, focusing on where that site is, what parcel it's on, how tall the tower might be, and what the variances are that are needed for each of those sites. That's what I'm looking for, is that kind of overall view of it without getting down to the nitty-gritty of all the RF.
Well, also, are these?
And just keep it simple. Just give us the basic geometrics of what it is we have to deal with, because that's what this board can react to.
Yeah, my other question before you answer, Scott, is are those other alternative sites that you're legally able? Are they sites that you've identified that are pieces of property that you have to purchase, or are they sites that you need to investigate whether it's something you can put a tower on, that you have to buy the land from somebody or get a easement? I'm not sure.
So we don't have, if I may, I'm sorry for cutting you off.
No.
We don't have land rights or lease rights to any other parcels for an alternative. In all honesty, there are not any real alternatives. I think Mike Mike the engineer tried to explain some historical information about what we were trying to do in Monroe. And I think Mike mentioned prior to this application being submitted, there were maybe 4 or so truly small cell sites that we were considering because of the high volume of traffic, the absolute need for this site. And then as detailed site investigations went along, and the site at Meadow Glen became much more real, we were able to tweak this site to eliminate, I believe it's 3 other sites, at least maybe 4. So by doing what we're doing here, the town is saving by not having 3 or 4 other sites. And that information, I don't want to go into more details unless you want to. That's probably the extent of what I can talk about.
Right.
Right. No, I think we've heard that explanation before. Or what we want to see is that in writing. Just, a quick overview on the 4 alternatives that you've looked at before settling on the Meadow Glen site.
And I
understand that you may not have gone into as deep a detail in each one of those sites because you ruled them out, but at least give us the benefit of knowing what those other choices might have been.
We will summarize it because, and just to be clear, it is in the record right now, but we will summarize it for you. We are happy to do that.
Right. My question, and it's something that maybe, I don't know if Rick can answer it later in his presentation, or maybe Mike Crosby has a comment on it, but my concern is that the search, and Rick mentioned that the search ring was very small. It was 0.06 of a mile.
Correct.
That's about 300 feet. So I went on Google and I did some analysis, and literally 400 about 500 feet away from there is Larkin Drive. Larkin Drive, I mean, literally just north. Larkin Drive is pretty much an industrial, road. There's nothing along that road. So I'm looking at like, what's the difference between locating something 500 feet from the current location, even if it's on a industrial like road that's a little taller than maybe needs to be or something. One of the other residents pointed out the plot over by Target. That one's 700 feet from the water tower. So I don't understand. I mean, I've done a lot of the analysis. I've read a lot of the analysis about, the RF and all of this, but I'm trying to understand that is a couple hundred feet. Is that the difference? Like that all of a sudden you don't get any relief in the capacity or the coverage? I'm not understanding.
It is in a sense because, and I can let Mike can fill this in more, but my recollection is when we discussed this, and we are, going to look at the target, but I thought Mike had said, the problem is that we're just getting a little too close to our Woodbury Commons site. And so when you're siting these facilities, you have to look at,
feet, though?
You have to look at, but again, I'll leave it up to the RF engineers.
I'll jump in real quick and just add on to this. So I just measured the search ring just so we have the actual number, 687 foot diameter. So that's not an unreasonable size diameter ring for a small cell. In fact, there's some small cells that they only cover 700 feet.
What's 0.06 then?
I don't know. I didn't come up with that number. I don't
That's
believe.
in your report.
I said 0.06. I don't think that came from me. I think that was somebody else.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's 687 foot diameter, and that's not unreasonable for the size of a small cell ring. Not all small cell rings are created equal. Everywhere we go, there's different conditions, there's terrain, there's population, there's different things that dictate for each site that we develop the diameter of that ring or the shape of that ring. So in the case of Bar Lane, and I want to talk to Mr. Murphy's sentiment earlier, which was about the different site selections. I don't want to get into a lot of detail. I realize that that's not what's asked for, but there's really two different things that are going on here. One is, what is the site selection for Bar Lane? That's what's most important here. That's what we need to be discussing. In an effort to sort of color in the picture a little bit more, to try to give you some more background to help you understand the efforts that we go through before we even get to this stage, and understand that if every member of every board that we go through and every site that we develop, if we were to just start from scratch every time we get to zoning, start over and do this, do that, we have to guide the process and not try to, reestablish it. We're trying to provide the history so that others understand that we had similar instincts. I think Rick mentioned several things in his report that actually matched up with, he actually did some reverse engineering, and he actually came to many of the same conclusions that we did. And after you go out and you actually start investigating these options and looking at the terrain issues that exist and the existing structures that exist, or the zoning conditions that may exist for each parcel, you get guided through a certain path that leads you to the conclusion that we have. So we haven't done that in the absence of any other level of investigation. So what we did was to color it in. We provided that supplemental RF information that gave some background as to how we got to developing the Bar Lane site. The Bar Lane site is going to be developed regardless of what other sites around it do or don't get developed. Bar Lane is part of our plan for this area. It's strategically located, it's ideally located, it's uniquely located. And I think we have some good options that we can talk about. We move this conversation forward to talking about the options that exist that are viable.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
So one of the topics that I wanted to go to briefly, and very briefly, because I believe Mr. McCartney did a very good job at trying to summarize the difference between the federal standard and the state standard. And if I could just say this in summary, the standard that's going to ultimately be applied may depend upon what the decision is. And because you do have these two standards, one is the least intrusive standard, and that comes directly from federal law and the Telecommunications Act. I'm just going to give you an example. If this board was to deny this application, And if we chose to challenge that in federal court, we would argue under the Telecommunications Act that what we gave you was the least intrusive standard, or the least intrusive alternative. If the court agreed with us, they would overturn your decision. If they don't agree with us, they would make your decision would stand. So then when you go over, if you were to grant our application, and if there was a lawsuit from the neighbors cannot sue under the Telecommunications Act. That is crystal clear. They don't have standing under that act, but they can sue under New York law in Article 78, arbitrary capricious. They could bring in the standard of the minimal. They would have to argue that what we proposed and what was approved was more than minimally intrusive. I don't know if that helps. It is very complex, and it seems counterintuitive, but that is the state of the law. We've litigated it at different times with different parties. I can guarantee you that's the state of the law. So again, don't know if it helps or not. I just wanted to throw that out there. And there is, I think, some disagreement between me and Mr. Campanelli as to the standard. And so I just want to leave it at that. I am very confident that what I just stated is absolutely correct in terms of what the laws are and the standards are.
And what's your opinion on the eligible facility law? One of my concerns, and something Rick brought up, is that, and it's an honest concern. It's a precedent concern about, okay, we grant this, you guys, put up your tower and it's there, and then we open the door for 5 or 6 more towers, or anybody else can come in there, and we wouldn't have any standing to say anything.
Yeah, you would have some standing, and this is a comment that I've heard before, so it's not the first board that has said this, but what I would say to that is, you first have to apply the public utility variance standard. I don't believe this board would have jurisdiction to deny our application because there's a possible fear that maybe somewhere down the road, someone else might come in here and say, we want to be judged an eligible facilities request.
Well, but you're, not to interrupt, but your competitors, obviously, I'm sure where all your competitors, cell towers are. And
do not, absolutely not.
No,
do not. Now, we know where their cell towers are when we're on them, but do we keep track of them?
But if there's a need in this area, and it's clearly that there's no other place that we can put this tower, and I'm sure they have the same coverage issues and the capacity issues you have. So
maybe not. I honestly can't say that. I'm not trying to be funny or cute here. I don't know. I can tell you there are plenty of times when we have new facilities like this that are developed and we don't have anybody else come on them. And there are times when we have cell towers where we do. But on this, what we have before you right now is a wooden utility pole. Not one that dominates the skyline. It's about 5 feet taller than that, 1.5 million gallon water tank that's out there. And I think that is important. We would, if you were to approve what's in front of you now, another carrier can't just automatically come on to our tower.
No, they could put up another tower.
Maybe not. I don't know that that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, because what happens is
one point to make here about the the pole that you're going to put up is, it's not just a utility pole. It's twice as high as any normal utility pole. And as a matter of fact, Meadow Glens has all of their utility service lines underground. So there's 0 utility poles out there right now. So this will stand out like a sore thumb. It'll be the only one of its kind out there.
I have to respectfully disagree. I think putting a 67-foot utility pole, which is larger than most standard utility poles, but a wooden utility pole that is sourced from the same places that the other poles come from, you put that in front of a 1.5 million gallon water structure, I guess it's in the eye of the beholder. I can't see how it stands out like a sore thumb. Now, having said that, we hear concerns. we're not blind, deaf, and, dumb. We hear the concerns. And one of the main purposes for me coming before this board tonight was to talk about the on-site alternatives. As you may recall, when we left, I think it was June 23rd, that meeting, there was a list of a few things we had to do. And one of the real important things was, I think, Chairman, you mentioned you wanted to see a new tower behind the water tank and what that would look like. And I believe that others said they would want to see what co-locating on the water tank would look like. I think, Peter, you said that that may make a difference and but you would want to see it.
Yeah.
Fair comment. So I made the statement that we may be able to do this without going back out into the field. I talked to our people. Turns out we have to go back out into the field. Mr. Said had said that he would like to be part of this process of the visual analysis. So knowing that we had to go back out into the field, we wanted to reach out to the town and say, can we coordinate this? We're going to go back out there and we're going to provide simulations with what the water tank or what the antennas would look like if they were on the water tank. I know that we provided a letter from our construction folks saying that they are opposed to it for the various reasons. We have gone back to them and explained the situation and said, this may be one of those instances where you're not going to get a chance to make that call. In other words, if co-locating on the water tank would make a big deal to the ZBA, we are willing to do that. And we will show you what it will look like. And as sure as I'm sitting here, it's going to be next to not noticeable because you won't have a pole there. You will have two antennas that will be, I believe, don't quote me, but I believe they're going to be attached via banding around the tank, but I could be wrong. They're going to be next to unnoticeable. I would expect that the neighbors will not, well, I don't think reasonable people would really object to it. Now, a lot of times neighbors want to object to things just because of those health reasons. We've heard a lot of health comments. We know we can't get into that. But what I'm saying is we want to show you what the co-location looks like. And in my view, if we do that, that is the least intrusive alternative available.
Hey, Scott, can I jump in for 1 second? It's Austin Side.
Please do.
I just want to let you know, I don't want there to be any misconception between what I said at the last meeting and what I said at this one. It's not that I don't want to be involved in the design per se as a board member, that's charged with evaluating the application. I'm just saying that it's really important that the folks that live in the community need to be involved in the process and kind of, like I said, they're the ones that have to wake up every morning with this thing. So it's not only about strapping, and it's not only about, yeah.
I think the folks in the community are as involved in the process as they can possibly be. As David pointed out earlier, this ultimately becomes a decision that the board has to make. It's not we get to listen to the comments that the local community has, and I think we are reacting to those comments. But it's not like they get a real seat at the table to design this thing, going
That's
forward.
right. They're not going to get a seat. They're not going to get a seat at the table to design this thing. And that has to be abundantly clear, number one. And number two, we have to also understand that strapping the antenna to the tank is not the only alternative. So that as if there was an alternatives analysis to locate the optimal site for the location of the antenna, there needs to be an alternatives analysis to understand the visual impacts. And it's our job to make sure that there's a mechanism for simply evaluating the impacts of the options. That's all. So it's maybe strapping it to the tank, could be behind the tank, could be in front of the tank. That's three options already. There may be a fourth, there may be a fifth. We need a matrix that shows the pros, the cons, the facts that we did the diligence. We looked at it all. That's all I'm saying. So it needs to be a rounded, holistic discussion that's has maybe renderings, illustrations, floor plans, a matrix. Basically a comprehensive analysis showing that we all did our job. That's all.
Can I just step in for just one moment? My name is Kathy Pomponio. I'm the project manager. Can you hear me?
For who?
For Verizon.
Okay.
for Verizon. I've been listening to the public hearing comments. And I just wanted to say, I mean, the reason that we're excited about doing this work session with you folks is that we want to open the dialogue to these options.
Okay.
So we feel that attaching the antennas to the tank is the least obtrusive option. Obviously, we have RF constraints as to where we can locate this facility. And we are going to address that. We are going to simplify it so that you folks understand it. But we want to open the dialogue as to, at this location, what would you like to see and how can we help you to visualize what it's going to look like?
Well, I guess at this location, what we were looking at were the options. You know, you got the three options: the tower in the front yard, which requires a front yard setback variance to boot. Plus, it's right directly in front of the existing dwelling, so there's a lot of negatives to that. Strapping it to the water tank itself, that you would need to clear with the Village of Harriman. It's their tank. And
Right.
I don't know if they have restrictions on that, but that would be one element of that plan that would need to be worked out. And a third element is really putting it in the backyard behind the tank. If that works out, even if the tower's taller, it's going to be further away. It'll be 150 feet further away from the nearest residence. And I think that provides a level of comfort to the neighbors, that are across the street from this thing. Because right now, this tower is literally across the street from a complex of 8 townhouses, and it's right in their front yard. If this thing were to fall down, it could fall down in their front yard. But if you put it behind the water tower, their visual impact is going to be so greatly reduced, I imagine, that they're not going to see it past the water tower.
Okay, so Scott, let's talk about how we plan to show these folks how it's going to what it's going to look like.
So what we have to
Excuse
do
me.
is we have to get.
I don't mean to interrupt. This is Noreen. The project manager for Verizon. I didn't catch your name and I need it for the minutes.
Sure, it's Kathy Pomponio. It's Kathy with a K.
Okay, and can you spell your last name?
Sure, it's P as in Peter, O-M as in Mary, P as in Peter, O-N as in Nancy, I-O.
Thank you very much. I'm
You're
sorry.
welcome.
So in order to move forward with showing the board and the neighbors what the different on-site alternatives would look like, we need to get back out into the field and we need to do some work, whether we fly a drone or a balloon, in order to establish the height at which we're talking about. So the antennas on the water tank, I think, are relatively easy, but we'll take more pictures, obviously, in different locations. We just want to make sure that, if we do this, when we do this, ZBA, do you want to be involved? You're more than welcome to come out with us. We show you how we do everything. We then, prepare the simulations after the photos are taken and the field work is done. And we would present you with a written report as to what was done. You're more than welcome to come out and observe it. Other towns have on occasion done that. We welcome it. We just need to pick a date to have it done, to get out there and to do it.
We do it all the time.
Yeah, and what Chairman Murphy, what you just mentioned, you want to see 3 different on-site alternatives.
Scott, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Scott, if the whole board is out there, does that not establish a quorum? Is that okay?
You're not conducting business.
The whole board could be there. We've done site visits that way as the planning board very frequently. We announce it as a public meeting. The public can attend, and we can go there as a total board. I don't know that we're going to get all 4 or 5 members out to your site visit at one time. I would certainly be willing to attend, given that it works with my schedule. You let me know when you can do it. And, if it fits into my schedule, I could certainly be out there.
Okay.
Yeah, the only concern, this is Dave McCartney, obviously the only concern is if we have a quorum that's out there at a time that's not been announced publicly as a meeting, that's a problem. So that's the only thing we have to avoid. If we are going to get a quorum, we need to announce it in advance and give everybody advance notice of that.
So maybe we work out a date between now and the meeting on the 28th, and we announce it on the 28th.
Right.
Yes, we could absolutely do that. Happy to do that. And yeah, I'm not concerned about the board being out there. David, I hear you. Even if the entire board was out there without notice, there's no conducting of business. So that doesn't concern me. But then again, David, I don't represent the board. So
yeah, it's a fair point. I just, as a matter of precaution, the second one member, if you have an unannounced meeting, the second one member starts talking to the other in the presence of a quorum about the substance of it is when it might be a problem.
Of course.
It's inevitable that somebody's going to try to do that. And so out of precaution, I always say, let's publicly announce it, or make sure you don't have a quorum. Go out whenever you want, just not with a quorum.
That's fine. So what we can do is we can communicate with whomever, with Noreen, Mr. McCartney, and get a date that works, and then it can be, publicly noticed. That's absolutely fine. We will look at those.
Can we talk about where we're going to take the pictures from? Because I know there was questions about why we didn't take photos from certain folks' property. And I mean, we obviously cannot trespass on property that we do not have an interest in or a legal interest in.
Yeah, I guess that's a good question. One of the things you can do with a drone is get the drone up in the air. Because one of the concerns is that, the homes that are directly across the street, their second floor bedrooms look out towards that water tank. And, if you took it from the ground, you wouldn't get the same view. If you had something in the air, 20 feet above the ground, you would have the same view that they're having from their bedroom window. That's the kind of thing that I think would be helpful. To satisfy the curiosity of the people across the street. I mean, because they're the ones that are potentially impacted the most by this tower.
So I think the only problem is that I don't think we can legally fly drones, at a second story level over somebody's property. I think that violates the law.
If we do it in the roadway, it'd be close enough to get a good representation of what it would look like.
If it pleases the board, can I chime in here for a moment? I represent the homeowners.
Certainly.
Okay. Well, what many companies have done in the past is simply get permission to go onto the homeowner's property. And that way you can actually take images directly from their property, whether it's first story, second story.
But we're not going to go inside their homes and take a picture out of the second story window. That we can't do.
Well, I've had companies do it in the past, and it happens all the time. And that's what you're supposed to do under federal law. That's what the federal judges say you're supposed to do. So if you don't want to do it, that's up to you.
Well, we can certainly go onto other people's property if the property owners provide and sign a release and indemnification form.
We generally give authorizations. We don't sign general releases. I allow my clients to sign authorizations. I just did it last week to allow representatives of the applicant to go wherever they need to go on the property to get a proper view. And in Omni Point, the judge said, the U.S. Second Circuit Court of Appeals said, the visual impact analysis from the applicant was defective because it didn't show photos from their second story windows, much less their backyards.
Yeah.
So if you want to get images, I'm telling you, I'll get you access to their properties, and not to be difficult. The goal is to give this board an accurate understanding of what the proposed installation would look like. There's an easy way to do it. If you want to show the extent of the adverse aesthetic impact that these homeowners will suffer, give this board images taken from those perspectives. We don't have to guess what it looks like. We don't have to look from a drone. Show the board exactly what it's going to look like, and then you can address why we're not going by target and making a taller tower like the town board's engineer suggested. So I'm saying I will make those properties available for proper visual impact analysis preparation.
Yeah, and we can work with you on the documentation, but we are going to want to release.
Quick question: is it possible that the homeowners can provide their own photos? That
yes,
way, there's no
So
question that the photo that's taken is from the apartment and the view that the person's going to have without anybody going into the house.
Absolutely.
They can. It's a little dangerous because we hire professionals to do this. You want to make sure that the photos are presented at the proper field, all the point of view, the field, the proper focal length, because when you do things, if you zoom in too much, you make it look exaggerated if you're too wide. And, it's got to be taken at a proper focal length, at what the eye looks like.
Sure, you guys could work that out on your own, in terms of whether you like the photo or not. I'm just saying, to try to minimize the risk for Verizon having to go onto somebody else's property with a drone or by foot. You guys could kind of work together to work out, what's the best shot. You may find that it's just better to just go on the property yourself.
Worst case scenario, if I have to, I'll have my clients hire a professional photographer, use the proper lens, use the proper focal length, and take photographs from their properties and submit them to the board to give this board an accurate representation of what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and when we have the antennas on the water tank, it's not going to be visible. And I'm guarantee you the neighbors are still going to complain, even when they can't see it. That said, we have to do the analysis, let them see. That's fine. Yeah, so we'll work on a date. And I just want to say one thing, and I'm sure Mr. Campanelli and I will disagree about this. I don't know how many lawsuits I've been involved with Telecommunications Act. We've never done photographs from a person's inside their house.
I've never done it.
And I've never lost a case ever. And I don't say that, I just saying, my point is that I know what OmniPoint says, but I've never done it in 24 years and I've never lost a case. And we've had photo simulations and the court always signs off on it if it's done professionally. So I'm sure Mr. Campanelli will disagree with me, but I just want to let you know what my experience has been. It's just my experience.
I can cite my track record in 7,000 cases as well. So whatever you'd like to do.
I just said it wasn't that purpose.
Simple and amicable.
I want to give the board
just figure out how to take the photos and move on.
Okay, we're at 8:30 already. We've been here for an hour. Mr. Olson, do you have any other points you'd like to point out about the documents you've sent to us recently, or have you completed your discussion about, the site visit?
So I think the site visit, we're all set. We'll come up with dates. We'll be in touch with the ZBA representatives, and we'll come up with that. Obviously, we're not going to have anything in place before the next meeting, which I forget what the date is. So I don't think there's going to be much to do at that meeting, because I think most of what we're doing now hinges on having this information. So, but we'll get that information before the meeting at least.
So
next meeting is July 28th.
Sorry. Next meeting is July 28th. And at the public hearing, we had agreed on a shot clock extension through, I think it was some period of time following that meeting. Obviously, we're going to need an extension, a further, maybe a tolling of some sort. Certainly, this upcoming meeting, nothing's going to be accomplished. We know that. So there will be a visit. There'll be a further submittal before the following meeting, which would be the August meeting. I don't know if you anticipate us receiving the full visual analysis sufficiently in advance of the August meeting in order to allow the board to go into that meeting thinking that they have a reasonable chance at actually making a decision that meeting, or whether we should extend the shot clock a little bit more, give us 2 more meetings. Of course, the last thing I want to do is delay, and I think that, you see what we're doing here. We're working on it with you diligently. What do you suggest? What are you willing to agree to, Scott?
I suggest that you and I get together after the meeting and maybe talk about, we've been willing to extend the shot clock. We see that the board is working to try to get through this diligently, and we have never held that up. So I don't know the answer because I don't know when the date is going to be exactly.
Okay.
I know that you have certain time frames within which things must be received. So why don't you and I get together? We have, I think, until 10 days after the 28th meeting. So we can work it out, and we're amenable to work it out.
Okay, that's fine.
So
I have it in my notes that we agreed to 10 days after the July 28th meeting.
Agreed.
Right, so we'll agree we're going to be extending that. We just don't know exactly the logistics as to when.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So if that's everything for now, Scott, I'd like to pass it along to Mr. Campanelli. If you could just briefly go over the high points of what you submitted to the board this week so that we're ready to review it during the next couple of weeks and be prepared for the next meeting.
Yes, I will be brief. First, I would touch on the two standards that Mr. McCartney talked about, and he's correct. There are the two standards. However, the least intrusive to establish an effective prohibition, an applicant has the burden of establishing that if you turn down their application, it violated the act because this was a necessary facility and the least intrusive means to remedy it. The only time you can go from the least intrusive means standard to the public benefit standard and place the burden on the applicant to be a minimal intrusion are those cases where the applicant has established that they are in fact a public utility. Now, I'm not sure what Orange County is or was because it was dissolved, but I'm going to assume they're a public utility. The burden remains on the applicant and the applicant alone to show the proposed facility would be a minimal intrusion on the community. And as the board accurately pointed out, this is in a place where all of the public utilities were undergrounded for a reason. This proposed pole, of course, is not a standard utility pole. It's more than twice the height of a standard utility pole, which would have a dramatic adverse aesthetic impact. There are 40 letters setting forth the dramatic adverse aesthetic impact that it will inflict upon the neighbors. In addition to reduced property values, between those two things, it's clearly not a minimal intrusion on the community. Of equal import, perhaps more important, I appreciate the fact that the board and the applicant are trying to come up with a less intrusive potential alternative, perhaps on the site. The problem I have is in 27 years, I've never seen a search ring of 0.06 miles. That's absurd. And consistent with what the board's RF engineer determined, whatever need this applicant has can most likely be met from an alternative site with a taller tower. And quite frankly, I've looked at the site myself. There's no reason why they can't go by target and make a slightly taller facility and remedy whatever gap they have. So even moving it to the other side of the water tower or putting it on the tower is still not a minimal intrusion. And it's certainly not the least intrusive means of remedying whatever gap they have. So my suggestion to the board is that the board follow the recommendation of its RF engineer and require this applicant to show meaningfully consideration of potential alternative locations, for example, across the street. There's no way you can't get a tower 700 feet away at a slightly taller elevation to remedy whatever gap you want in a commercial area as to putting it dead center in the front of some homes. It makes absolutely no sense, as does a 0.06 search ring. It's absurd. I just never saw anything like it. So given the fact that we have a public meeting coming up in the future, and I think my brief otherwise speaks for itself, I appreciate the board's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campanelli. Okay, that brings us back around to Rick Edwards, our Cityscape, to brief us on his latest update to his report.
Yeah, Rick Edwards here. I hope everybody can hear me okay.
Yes,
I'm disappointed that apparently not many people have said I read the report that I put together. My intention was to have it to you this morning, but it ended up in a bunch of rewrites, and you didn't get it till later. Had you read the report, a lot of the discussions you just had may have been unnecessary, especially on the eligible facilities aspect. All of the issues that I brought up and that were brought up in the comments today of the three major concerns I have on the site, which are equal treatment, the eligible facility, and the eligible facility is the greatest one, is something that I think we figured out a way to work around. There's several processes so far in this application. Right now, we're dealing with the zoning issue, the variance issue, and then following the variance issue, there is, if it goes past this point, the planning aspect. And those are separate entities, and we've been working on the questions about the zoning, but also have been concentrating on the aesthetics aspect of the application and the needs. As far as You heard Verizon mention parts about strapping it to the tank. That was the agreement or the discussion that Mike Crosby and I had last week when the town allowed us to talk. And we did make several different provisions, compromised on some things, got a great understanding, a better understanding of the objectives and the goals of Verizon. We saw that, well, I don't need to go into a lot of details on this, but effectively, engineering is engineering. There are certain things that are factual. There are other things that have a lot of variables about them. I'm thinking of so many things simultaneously while I'm talking here because most of these things came up earlier today on some other comments. There are some truths that have been said by Mr. Campanelli that you can go greater heights and accomplish things. So that's factual. What's the greater height though? What's acceptable greater height? Also, where exactly would that site be? Things like this, when engineering and this type of engineering, when you have an action, you have multiple other reactions. Most of them are not good. And so you have to have an understanding of how RF works, which is all theoretical still. It's not based on anything, laws of physics, it's all theoretical. It's always changing, it's hard to duplicate. Very difficult to duplicate. That's one of the reasons why the majority of advanced people prefer computer-generated maps over drive tests because drive tests are far more susceptible to errors than are computer-generated facilities with using the more advanced software that's available currently. Again, I'm bouncing around, but I think it's important that we have to understand there are alternatives that have been looked at, and as I say, I wish everybody had read my report and I would like to have had a chance to talk about that early on because I think there would have been some changes.
Rick, not to interrupt, but I read the report that you submitted today. Kevin read it. I'm sure Mike read it. Maybe I'm not understanding what you think we don't understand about the report submittal today.
Well,
I looked at it too, by the way.
Okay, well, that I guess that's good, but there were several points I brought up, and I addressed each of those items that you were mentioning earlier about how we want to resolve some of these issues and some of these problems.
But you mentioned the eligible facility law, but what's your what exactly is your what's your issue with the?
Well, some of the proposals of the.
Let me chime in since that's a legal issue, Rick.
Okay.
The eligible facility law says that if a wireless facility is constructed, another carrier at a later date has the ability to increase the size of that structure by up to 20 feet or 10% of the structure to add an additional carrier to it. In this particular instance, that would mean adding to the height of the wooden pole as it is currently proposed. What Rick was trying to point out was that by using the alternative that he suggested, you can't make the water tank bigger, obviously. Other carriers could potentially co-locate it on it in a similar fashion, but you're not going to change the impact of the water tank that is already existing.
Right. Well said. In other words, the pole's gone. It's no more there. It's not there anymore. It's gone. And also the mounting of the equipment could be totally concealed. Everything regarding the facility, the way it's been, way it was originally designed, is completely changed, and that's what the report was supposed to point out.
Right. So you're saying that if the alternative of co-locating on the water tower was an option, which we don't even know if it is, it's got to be something that we'd have to get approved by the Village of Harriman, I would assume, that would deem the eligible facility law kind of null in terms of them being able to add to their tower.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. The pole goes away. The eligible facility is a water tank at that point. They can't change the height and the width of a water tank.
Right.
So it's a different structure. So that's what the beauty of this plan was.
And the third alternative that you discussed, which was moving it behind the water tank on a larger tower, would still leave the opportunity for an eligible facility request to be received, and that larger tower could potentially get even bigger in the future.
And that larger tower was a full-blown cell facility. It would be a monopole or a lattice-type tower with a full wraparound set of antennas, far more visible and a much greater visual impact than what's being proposed. What was worked out is that my recommendation was to find a way, and it's up to Verizon to work this out, not the town of Monroe, to work it out with Harriman to side mount this antenna, color match it, and all the attachments and everything around it color match to the tank. Also, the electronic equipment could be put on the backside of the tank. There's nothing at that point visible other than the protrusion of the antennas, which will be a pair of antennas, my understanding, because we're staying with the directional, and by using this directional antenna properly mounting on the tank, you still only will end up with one facility instead of three, as I've come up with. They still think it's four, but that eliminates either three or four, eliminates 2 or 3 additional sites. You'll have one facility and that's it. And it's going to be virtually invisible. I doubt that people will see this site once it's installed if it's done right. And I keep emphasizing if it's done right. That goes under the planning side of it. Again, we're right now resolving the zoning issue. I'll also tell you that Cityscape has never recommended a variance approval. In our history, we haven't, because a variance approval opens the door to so many other issues. You read the report, how I've written that, and maybe
I know, that's what you said in the report.
Yeah, all of those items are eliminated. It's now a single facility that I think is going to be hard to even see. And
what's your opinion of increasing the search ring even by double of what they've currently done? And then, I mean, like, as I looked at it, like 0.06 is obviously, 600 feet is the diameter. So obviously half, the radius is going to be 300 feet, which is 0.06. So if you go to 500 feet or 580 feet, like to a Larkin Drive or over to 700 feet to the target, is there not a tower able to be constructed that would resolve, even if it's a little taller, wouldn't it would resolve the issues?
It will not be a little taller. It'd be substantially taller, and still that doesn't solve the issue. The problem is the search ring that's being referenced here is a small cell ring. There were 3 or 4 small cell rings. That's why they're smaller. If it had been a full cell site, could be up to 1/4 mile in radius. But that's a full cell facility, one starting at 120 to 150 to 200 feet tall. But the issue that I think that I'm trying to point out here is, after discussing, and most of this stuff is standard knowledge for RF engineering people, is in order to move that, and this is why I was disturbed last time when Mr. Cosby was making his comments, and moving the pole to the backside of the water tank, that completely eliminated any recommendation I would have had to use as a single site, because all of a sudden it's changed. And the changing of this makes it a full facility, which is substantially more visually impact than a small cell. And so that's the difference. You're talking about a small cell versus a full-blown cell site. A monopole I would think probably 120 feet minimal, and probably more than that, because whenever you add a cell site, you really have to consider the other carriers, and there's 2 others in the market, 3, but 2 emerged, that have to have facilities under the equal treatment. You would not want to build a single 120-foot cell site for just Verizon, because another carrier is going to come in and they're going to want another one right beside it, at the same height or maybe higher. That's what you're trying to avoid.
Rick, this is Mike Murphy. How do we get to a tower that's 120 feet tall just by putting it behind the tank? That's seems like it's twice the height of the tower or the tank.
It's got to be high enough to reach the rest of the area. The way this antenna was designed, the tank was concealing it in one direction, and it also is a directional antenna. It's beaming the signal. you can't, once it goes up above the treetops, it's all of a sudden open to the full array of the full system. And Verizon's better to respond to this than I do, because I don't know where their other sites are. But we do know that they'll have others. We know of the 3 that's in the reports: Harriman, Monroe, and
Lexington Hills.
Yeah. And then there's some others to the south. There's others to the north, past Joel, I think the other community north end. You have to fit these in. They fit, you just don't throw a dart out there and find where a site will fit. There's an awful lot of considerations you have to make. There's looking at interference to adjacent facilities. When you start raising the height of the towers, you got to start aiming the antennas down. When you beam tilt, in other words, if you raise it too high, the signal's going to reach too far, interfering with other sites. So you've got to angle the antennas to point toward the ground. As you do that, it reduces the service area again. And as you do that, you've got to go higher. That's how it works. I mean, any way you look at it, as you make changes, as I said earlier, for every engineering action, there are multiple reactions. Most of them are not good. And those are things that unless you're a physics major or an engineer, it's hard to understand these things. And that's what we're there to help you with, to make sure you don't make mistakes that's going to trouble you in the future. And that everything that we're doing always looks at what the future implications will be. And that's everything that we do on our reports, is trying to resolve the issues of the carrier in the way the carrier needs to have it done, so that they don't have future issues in the same location, yet meet the needs and the goals as specified in the local ordinance and the federal and state laws. That's how we look at everything.
So Rich, bottom line is that Verizon is capitalizing on a water tower.
That's exactly right. The placement of this water tank at that location and the way they designed the system is extremely creative. And I didn't want to say those words, but it's factual, it is. My background is radio and TV for 40 years before I got into it. I'm old, dude. Before I got into the wireless side of it, but I've done a lot of AM and FM, specifically AM designs, and we use things like this and directional antennas a lot. And for the last 20 years of Cityscape's life, I've been trying to find somebody that would put a directional antenna in. Every time we try to say, why don't you put a directional antenna at this point right here? I'll give you a perfect example. George Washington's house in at Mount Vernon. T-Mobile is looking to build a directional beam-in antenna from across the river in order to avoid another issue they're accomplishing, or they're going to have. But we suggested put in a directional antenna. They're going to be doing it. We've suggested that multiple times in the past, and every time we suggest doing a directional antenna, the carriers oppose us. They didn't want to get into setting a precedent of some kind. And when I saw what was planned on here, it opened the eyes to somebody doing something that's creative, because otherwise you would have had, we knew you would have automatically have to have 2 additional sites somewhere that we singled out around Lexington Hills. There's 2 Lexington Hill Drive in 2 locations, and they would take 2 facilities somewhere around that area in order to accomplish the goals. Plus you still had to have bar lane. No matter what you did, bar lane had to be there. I've always dismissed the one in the shopping center, the third other site that Verizon, because I think they could actually, if they need that site that much, they can do similar to what's done at the dental office on the shopping center. It's just mount a small single antenna on the top of that building to accomplish that. Plus the ground elevation there is another erratic issue. The problem you have in Monroe is the terrain is a factor that you have to deal with. And these radio waves travel in straight lines. Even though they do refract and bend and shape somewhat, for a solid facility, you've got to have some eye level or straight line sight for it to work in a robust manner, especially when you're dealing with speed. And everything now is growing towards speed. And the more disruptions and problems you have in a signal, the slower the speed is. There's so many factors that are involved in this whole process. But I'm going back to the point. I did calculate an alternative that could be done, and I'm going to say it, and I knew that this would probably come up at some point. But if you want to resolve the issue, it would take, and I've already figured this out, 425-foot tower somewhere either in the town of Monroe, south of this site. 425 feet is what I figured that tower would have to be in order to accomplish the goals here. That's why I'm saying what's been designed here is the least intrusive method. 425 feet, and that would probably be a guide tower with lights on it. It's going to be one of the highest locations in your area. If that's not a visual impact, I don't know what is. But that's what it would take to try to make something work. There's always
that's got to be in the list. It's got to be on the list. That's got to be on the list. Whatever. If we have a matrix, you got to put that one on, because we have to evaluate that. I mean, come on. I mean, that's a big deal. I haven't seen that reported on by anybody.
Yeah, that's the first one I heard on that one.
Where it would go. The other thing is that everywhere I looked, there was not enough room to put something like that anywhere in the area. So, I mean, these are things I looked at. I can't, but the other thing you got to remember is that's in a perfect world. I don't have the factors and the parameters that Verizon has. They have specific goals and needs and personalization they use for all their sites, which is not shared with anybody. What I did was it's a Longley Rice approach, which is an engineering method that's used just to see what the coverage would be, looking at angles from locations that would put signals into gaps and so forth. But the thing you got to remember is I'm not even counting what signals are already there. This could be an interference factor. Oh, and also that would be a directional facility too. So there's other things. When you say add it to the matrix, there's, why not? Well, if you want to add a matrix, let's put a satellite up there, because a satellite will do this too. If you can find a small beam satellite, that's another one. But when you say, if you want to have everything out there, we can list it, but I don't know how anybody's going to put a satellite, a narrow beam satellite with a focus on a small point, but that'll work. As a matter of fact, I saw today that Amazon is looking to do that with their with high-speed broadband. Announced today that Amazon's looking to do that instead of doing the terrestrial base. So
I don't know, Rick. I don't know if we're really asking for a cost-benefit analysis, but I think it's just an alternatives analysis. I don't know. I mean, Mike, where do we end? What's the boundary?
I could not give you that as a fact. I need to keep going here, because while it sounds simple to you to do that, there's so much that's unknown, and it would be dismissed so quickly because of other factors that I'm not aware of. I will guarantee it would be dismissed because, again, there's other factors involved. They've identified a small area. That's a terrain-driven problem initially, plus there's a capacity issue. So all of these factors have to be resolved, and those coverage and capacity are not really, they're apples and oranges, but they can be countered and solved in a similar method.
So, I'm sorry, can I just interrupt? Because I heard satellite as a possible alternative. That's not an alternative, because we don't have any legal right. Okay. I just want to narrow the list.
Yeah, no, I said that if you don't want all the alternatives out there, and he said he wanted to put it in the matrix. I said crazy things like that. No,
okay.
No, that's impossible.
Understood. We're on the same page. I just want to make sure the board is
my
on that
point was
page.
I can give you a lot of other examples things to be done, but it doesn't make sense. It will never happen.
We don't want to go to the silly factor. We want to stay within the realm. We want to stay within the realm of viable and real.
Okay, a 425-foot tower is not.
Excuse me.
That's unreal.
Excuse me, but just getting back to the alternatives analysis, I was just looking for documentation of the alternatives that have already been considered, not, sending you off on a wild goose chase to do a bunch more. But like, if Rick has already looked at these things and said, well, if we did this could work, but it would be a terrible eyesore on the community for miles and miles away. I mean, you could throw that into the matrix, but my goal was to, see what you have looked at already, put it in a simple, I'm an engineer too, so I'm used to doing feasibility studies, and you list your alternatives. You go through each one of your alternatives, you describe them, you get to the end of the report, you put together a summary matrix, and you say, here's the 5 alternatives we looked at, these are the 7 criteria we compared it against, and voila, this is the best one. This is the least intrusive plan that satisfies the goals and objectives of the program. So, that's what I'm looking for in this on this project? Just a summary of what's already been looked at. I mean, you know, Rick brought up some interesting ideas here tonight, but you know, we don't have to go down that road of, you know, satellites in the sky and everything else. As Austin said, you know, let's keep it real. And, you know, again, I'm not looking for something that is, you know, to the nth degree here. Just basically document what you've already done.
That's what was done.
Yeah.
Yes, Chairman Murphy, absolutely. We heard you. We will put that, at least from our end, the summary matrix together so that you have a good understanding of what we've looked at.
And quite honestly, for you know, one of the things you look at in a feasibility study is cost. Your cost doesn't really matter to us. So if you don't have cost for all the alternatives you looked at, don't go out, develop costs for things that you're not looking to build. We're more concerned with the impacts and the locations of these alternative towers.
And
we can say with a straight face when we look at the crowd that yes, the applicant has presented us with an alternative matrix and a set of different plans they've looked at, and this truly is the best location for, you know, the following reasons.
I understand what you're looking for.
We'll build the case.
Yeah, I want, let me just jump in for a second, because that's just on that point. The board isn't looking to find the best location. It's evaluating a proposal from Verizon and determining whether it's minimally intrusive and or is the least intrusive method to solve the problem. And so it's important to come up to keep focused on that. And I think one of the things that Rick Edwards was saying, if I'm hearing it right, is that assuming that strapping it to the outside of the tank, you know, is feasible, that it can be done. I think what I'm hearing Rick say is that in that event, then the proposal that Verizon has come to the board with this pole on the front of that parcel in front of the tank is not the least intrusive alternative, at the very least from that standpoint, from the standpoint of those two options. There's one that's less intrusive than the other, assuming it's feasible. I think, Rick, is that what you're saying in that regard?
I don't know if I misunderstood you. I say the pole goes away. The least intrusive is the side mounting on the pole. But let me do one more thing. When I'm looking at this, I looked at exactly.
David, yes, that's what he's saying.
Yeah, I looked exactly how you described what's the least intrusive manner that fits the needs of the applicant. I didn't look at cost. Okay, that's why I threw these other parameters. When we looked at stuff, we looked at alternative sites and raising heights to reach these gullies and the valleys. No, we don't look, because there's nothing in what we were asked to do that had a cost factor involved to it, but there's certain things that you know is never going to happen. The satellite's not going to happen. I can tell you right now that a 425-foot tower is not going to happen either for a lot of reasons, one of which is Verizon's not going to spend that kind of dollars to put it up there. They would not find a tower company that would build it there because they would never repay for the cost of it. Plus the objections that a lit 425-foot tower would have in the community would be years in problems. So that's why that's not, I didn't look at it from a cost standpoint, it's not reasonable.
Rick, one of the things I think that's coming out of this is that, you know, we have to grant a use variance for a cell tower to be installed outside of the designated areas within the town, the 5 designated areas. And through this water tower solution, it really narrows it down. Anybody that comes in the future, we can say, well, you know, you can't just go and put up a tower because Verizon was able to put up a tower. Verizon worked out because they had a unique solution that could be mounted to the side of an existing water tank and was very unintrusive to the community. So am I correct in that approach?
Yes.
Is that what
absolutely.
we're saying? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mike, can I ask one stupid question, not to prolong this issue, but one, do we need an inspection of the tank? 2, do we need to be careful that you could only mount so many antennas on the tank? Are we limiting competition? You know what I'm saying? I don't know how many antennas are going to come in the future.
We don't need to worry about that. That's the future. You're worried about the application that's before you. That's it.
Right.
Okay, good. All right, cool.
And the structural stability of the tank, that's between the Village of Harriman and the applicant to work out.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Well, that was a good conversation. Any closing words, Rick, or was that pretty much the sum of it?
No, I think we finally got to the root of the issue. I think that I don't know how the citizens are going to, but we have heard very clearly the entire time, and we have always operated from the standpoint, as David has laid it out, what's the least obtrusive visual impact that meets the needs of the applicant. And that's the marching orders we've had from the get-go. And we looked at alternatives as extreme alternatives, trying to find a solution. And by finding the worst alternative, you look at all methods to even break those into simpler facts. There were none. What they have laid out, what they've designed, is the least offensive application, a process. And with what's been worked out since that point, it's even better. It's actually getting improved, and the neighbors are not going to have a poll. You're not going to end up with the equal treatment. You're not going to end up with the 6409 issue of changing the heights and so forth. That's not going to happen. All those problems are going away.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've kind of gone through each of the parties that have submitted information to us tonight or over the past couple of weeks. We've kind of laid out the path for going forward. At next month's meeting, we're going to, announce the extension of the public hearing to the August meeting. And, sometime between now and August, hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll be setting up that site visit to take a look at the visual analysis that's being done for this project. And I think that's pretty much it at the moment, right? Those are the tasks ahead of us. The board, myself, we have to continue to read through all of these submittals we received. And having had this conversation, I think that makes it a lot easier for us because we can focus on the important part and separate out all the background noise in those reports that we've received, because there's a lot of information. Like I said, this is a board that's used to looking at a set of site plans, not legal briefs from week to week to week. So I thank you for all of your attendance here tonight, and I don't know if anybody has any final comments they want to make, board members.
No.
Good.
Yeah, thank you to Scott Olson and Mr. Campanelli, because those two are the harder ones to follow. The cityscape reading was, I thought, pretty straightforward, to me anyway. So clarification from the two attorneys, thank you.
Okay.
Nothing
And I think that's David's job.
Well, not clarification.
All right.
Just want to thank you guys for allowing us to do this tonight.
Oh, certainly.
Thank you.
We're looking to get through this process, but we also, we have the local residents out there that have really, voiced their opposition to this project. We want to find a happy medium that may allow you to build your facility and not be as intrusive or impactful to the local community. And if we can come to that solution, that is a unique solution because of the water tower, that's even better.
Understood. Thank you again.
Yeah, and Dave McCartney, I'd like to thank everybody that's spoken tonight, and particularly Rick, the work that you put into it, and Scott Olson and Andrew Campanelli, your submissions and that you've put in, although they're thick, they're both excellent, and they're very good representations for each of your clients, and I appreciate it on the legal side.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, that's all that we had on our agenda for tonight, and we're just rolling past 9 o'clock now. And I guess this closes out our hearing of the Verizon application. Board members, do you want to stay on the line to talk about any of the other applications we have coming at us in 2 weeks?
I mean,
Mike, this is us inside. I'm okay. I'm pretty clear on what's going on for now. I think I need to review a little bit.
Yeah,
I'll get back to you.
I need to do some reviews and some site visits.
I've been looking at the other stuff, at the Verizon stuff.
Okay. Well, would anybody like to make a motion to close the meeting?
Did we
I'll
make
make
a
a
motion?
Oh, we didn't open it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Do we have to make a motion, Dave, to close this meeting?
It's a workshop session. I don't know. I guess out of habit, I asked for that.
Yeah, I don't know that it matters. I mean, you know, you can for finality if it makes you feel better.
I'll make a motion to close the meeting.
And I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's
Thanks,
unanimous.
everybody.
All right. Thank you very much.